Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode number 184, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan 65-step strategic planning process. For those of you who are new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. And I'm very excited about our guest today because we were just talking about how we go way back in the business. Our guest is Annie Mahle, who's main chef and author. Annie, I want to welcome you to the PR Maven Podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to see you, and also good to be here.
I feel the same way. It's nice to see you too. We haven't seen each other in the same space for a long time.
It's great.
So Annie Mahle has been cooking professional for over 30 years in her own kitchens and other people's kitchens. Annie trained at the Culinary Institute of America, often known as the CIA, and she owned and ran the schooner J&E Riggin, a Maine windjammer, with her husband, John Finger. In that tiny galley, she prepared 3 meals a day for guests all summer long. Her cooking recipes and cookbooks have been highlighted on Today and Throwdown with Bobby Flay. Her food and the Riggin have been featured in the Food Network, Family Circle, Women's Day, the Boston Globe, and frequently on News Center Maine in the 207 kitchen, where I often see her, and I love that. Her most recent award-winning cookbook, The Tiny Kitchen Cookbook, Strategies and Recipes for Creating Amazing Meals in Small Spaces, has been well received in the tiny space community, but also in larger kitchens where some home cooks are looking for healthy, smart recipes for two. So Annie, I'm just fascinated with your career because it's just it's like made for TV career, made for podcasting career. So tell us about your career and how you got into cooking and windjamming in the first place.
Well, I got into cooking through windjamming, really. I mean, I'd worked when I was in college and before that in kitchens, but places without any connection to the craft at all. And then when I came out to sail, so I graduated from college and I said, all right, I don't know what I'm going to do. I cannot go on to do more schooling right now. I just can't do it. So I'm going to take a break. This is before gap years were a thing. I'm going to take a break and I want to learn how to sail. I want to travel and I'm not calling home for money. Those were my 3 objectives. Pretty simple. So I ended up getting a job on one of the windjammers out here. And that was really my first introduction to full-on breads and pies and yogurt and like things from scratch. And that was also about the same time that our culture in general was starting on that journey back to food that, you know, we know where it comes from, and gardens that we grow or farmers markets, things like that, where our whole culture was headed in that direction. So I kind of grew at the same time that the rest of us did. And then I incorporated that into all of our meals eventually I was a crew member. And then eventually my husband and I bought the schooner J&E Riggin, and we ran her for 23 years. And I was the chief cook and bottle washer down in the galley.
And you are a captain also, aren't you?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So both you and your husband are captains. And what did you have to go through to become a captain?
Well, you have to have, at least for my license, you have to have a solid 360 days on the water. So 3+ years if you're not out there continuously. They need to be on the tonnage vessel that your license corresponds to. So at least some of that time. And our boat is 100 ton. So that's my license, 100-ton license. And then you need to study and sit for the exam, because even though you know your microcosm, the questions might be about storage or cargo or tugboats or something like that. So I did a lot of studying about what things that are specific to those industries as well.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty comprehensive.
It is.
And I just think it's fascinating that you have, you're a boat captain, but also you have this culinary degree too. So I don't know if you call that right brain and left brain, but it's a lot of brain power.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty rare to have that, the creativity and the executive function all in the same person. Typically you're an artist and you struggle with some of the, organizing things, or you're an organizer, but you can't think of a creative, an idea that, unless it's about organizing, because there's creativity in organizing too. But yeah. Those two things seem to live in me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating. And your recent book is about cooking in a tiny kitchen. Speaking of being organized, you really have to be organized to cook in a tiny kitchen. So
Yes,
what is it about tiny kitchens that resonates with people who are cooking, whether on land or at sea?
Well, the thing is, almost none of us have the kitchen space that we dream of. So whether you're cooking on a sailboat or in an RV or in a tiny house, or you're just in your kitchen, which doesn't have miles of counter space, you have to be organized. And that's true in restaurants as well. So most restaurant kitchens, all the room is spared for the front of the house. And then the kitchens have tiny little spaces where you have, 2 square feet where you're prepping, and you've got everything set up and you kind of circle your 2 square feet, your prep space, like if you're on the line, you've got your space in front of you, your space behind you, and that's it. And then somebody right next to you, shoulder to shoulder, has their space in front of them, the space behind them. So all of those things, plus 23 years of cooking in a tiny galley so how I define tiny kitchen is, if you can do a jumping jack in your kitchen, that's not a tiny kitchen. That's just maybe a small space. But if you can go like this, and you can't see my arms, but if you can put your arms out and you can touch 2 walls of your kitchen, that's a tiny kitchen.
Yeah.
So that was my kitchen on the riggin, the galley. That's what it's called on a boat. My galley on the riggin for years. And whether you're cooking for 2 people or you're cooking for 30, which is what I did, we don't want to, as much as any of us love to cook, having that time be efficient and smart just makes sense. Even if you love being in the kitchen, having it be efficient and smart is how to go. So all of those things, from professional restaurants and my galley time and cooking in tons of other small spaces, I pulled all of those things together, all that smart way of working together.
I just want to mention that we're seeing you with your cat named Charlie.
Yeah. Charlie. Yes.
Charlie's so sweet.
I want to be a part of this too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when you're cooking in a tiny kitchen, do you make different types of recipes because you have less space to spread out?
Yep. So every kitchen, no matter what, restaurant, not restaurant, has some things that it's really good at that you can do really well in, and some things that it's just not suited for. So that's definitely true when you're cooking for 2 people and when you're in a small space. So the first thing I think about related to that is the number of pans that you use. So when you're only cooking for 2 people, it's possible to cook your whole meal in, for example, a 10 or 12-inch cast iron skillet. And that's your one dish to clean up. Which, when you're cooking for a large family, like, when our kids were growing up, we had 4. And so I was making more food, but also there were 3 people. I was cooking and there were 3 people cleaning up the kitchen. Now I'm cooking and my husband cleans up. And if I just like lay waste to the kitchen, walk in and do a hurricane thing, it's a long time for him to clean up. So I have, with the Tiny Kitchen cookbook and also just it being the 2 of us, have been teaching myself and learning and then creating recipes around, what if I just used 1 pan? Or what if I used maybe at the most 2? And then when I was making these recipes, I took everything but those pans out of the kitchen, and I only cooked with 1 skillet, 1 saucepan, 1 spoon, 1 fork, 1 set of tongs, and it's fine. We don't need a lot of stuff to cook. We don't need a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do, as you say, lay waste to their kitchen and
Right.
use a lot of different pans. So I think that's fascinating. So what is your favorite meal to cook and serve to others?
Well, my favorite thing to do, my favorite way to cook is, so this isn't a specific meal, is to get to the end of the week and open the refrigerator door and say, okay, there's still food in here and I'm not going to the grocery store, but I don't know what I'm making yet. So I just start pulling stuff out. Like, okay, we could go in an Italian direction with these 3 things, or we could go in an Asian direction with these 3 things. And I just pick things that'll go together and usually I can get 3 or 4 more meals out of what's in the refrigerator before I go to the grocery store. And that's just like I call that using up leftovers meals.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because I think so many people are programmed to just go to the store every time they want to cook a meal. And
right. And then we waste so much food when there's so much goodness in a refrigerator just waiting to become something. And I think part of that is the discomfort of not always knowing, like, how do I put those things together, which is why in a number of my cookbooks, and the Tiny Kitchen cookbook too, I talk about, okay, if you have this, like you made this thing from the cookbook, and then you have these 3 things left over. Now, what can you make with these 3 things that are left over, or these 4 things? What can you make with those and turn that into another meal?
It reminds me, my mom used to volunteer at a place called the Norlands, which is a living history museum in Livermore, Maine. It's kind of like old Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts, but she did what was called the kitchen scene. So she was dressed up in a long dress like in the 1800s, but she would teach the kids how to make soup out of what they had in the cupboard.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, she said, you have to learn how to go shopping in your own pantry or in
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of like going shopping in your own closet when you kind of.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I love that. So you have built a strong personal brand. And I don't know if you think of it in that way, but your personal brand does revolve around cooking and windjamming. So how have you kind of molded your personal brand, especially now that you're not on the Windjammer anymore? You're sort of you're an author and a personality.
Yeah, you're right. I definitely don't think about it as I know I probably should think about it that way, but I don't. But it does. It just goes to the things that are core about what are important to me. Just if it were a business, you'd kind of identify what your core values are or your core mission, right? And mine is about intention. It's about making things in the kitchen with intention, but also sewing that way, or being in the garden, or what do you choose to bring into your home, and how does that serve you and your family, or you as your marriage, or you as an individual, and what are the things that maybe you don't choose to bring into your home, your space that you get to define. What are those things that maybe you don't choose to bring in? And so therefore then the public face of, so that's the kind of what's behind. And then the public face is defined by the things that I choose to bring into my space. So that's homegrown, homemade, whether it's by, a piece of knitwear or something that I make in the kitchen.
I think that's awesome. And you have two girls who are now in their 20s. Do they live that way also?
They do. Yeah,
that's
they
awesome.
both do. Yeah, they seem to have absorbed. I mean, it's just how we lived. So they seem to have absorbed that as well. The things that they're intentional about, what they have been really good about creating their space. And they're also just kind of watching them be intentional about their money or intentional about their time. Or it's lovely to watch them go from struggling with some of those things to really starting to have definition for themselves.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of living an intentional life, not letting life just happen to you, but instead setting a vision for your life and living a vision. And I believe that the pandemic allowed us to slow down and kind of look inside a little bit.
I absolutely agree. What is important to us? We were in our spaces a lot more, right? So we had an opportunity to look around and say, you know what? I might like this a little better or there are some things that I do that I really like, but I want more of that. I want more family time. I want more time around the table. I want more. And so there's a lot, I feel as if anyway, I'm reading a number of articles about people who, now that things have opened up a little, there's still this thought about wanting to hold on to and maintain some of those habits and that habit life that we created for ourselves when we, quote, had more time and we weren't as distracted. But to me, it's still about now, even now, then and now, what do you choose to bring in? Which means by definition, you're going to choose things that you're not bringing in. You're going to say no.
Especially if you're in a tiny kitchen, you only have room for so much, right?
That's right. So you're standing in the store and you're looking at either, you're looking at food that you want to buy, or you're looking at equipment that you want to buy. You really need to think, is there a place for this thing? And if I really need this thing that's going to do fabulous things for me, does it do more than one thing? So I talk about that in the book too. Is it a mono tool? It only does one thing, or does it do a lot of things? In which case, that's a candidate for coming into a tiny kitchen. But then if you're bringing something in, is there something that's going out? Are you choosing a couple of things that you don't use any longer and out it goes?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's the way we should think about everything. We talked about clothes too. Like you buy a new sweater, you should get rid of one of your old sweaters.
Right. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue with more from Annie, but now it's time to remind you that if you'd like to get access to my free book, you can go to prmaven.com/giveaway. And my book entitled Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand is there. And Annie, you might be receiving a copy in the mail. So watch your mailbox.
Thank you.
But we'll be right back with more from Annie Mahle.
After reading PR Works, I really started to think about how marketing actually works. And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but what I realize is that each platform nowadays that we use out there in digital media and social media has its own nuance and also quirks to it. And understanding how they're used is exceedingly important. Because when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And you can't approach it that way in marketing. And that's where I think Nancy's brilliance really shined in PR Works. I think Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand is really sort of the manifesto of understanding that there's many different levels to marketing. It's on your personal side of your brand, how actually you express yourself through business, but also what people hear you saying and what they see out there in the public eye as well. So I think what's really important there, that's really the blueprint of how you go about using these new social media platforms, but also to express who you are as a human being. Because people want to see you authentically and genuinely working with not only what you do, but also with the customers. And Nancy, on a personal level, I think that's who she is. She embodies that approach.
Oh, Nancy, I can't hear you as well now. Everything was working great.
Evidently, it's an internet issue. So
There we go. There we go. We're good.
okay. So yes, we're streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which is very exciting. That is when the internet works. So Annie, PR has been a big part of your career. And actually, that's how you and I met, because my PR agency used to handle the PR for the Windjammer Association. And I remember seeing you and your husband at all the meetings with the captains. And that was a long time ago. Our kids are all still very little. So tell me how PR has helped you with your business then and now.
I mean, I think it's fabulous to have someone else outside of you and your work looking at your story in a way that is, somebody who's a little removed from, when you're doing your stuff, sometimes you're just doing your thing and you're going and we forget to stand back and take a look. And also, having someone, I think, like yourself or other PR folks in that world, to be able to tease out stories that, like, you think, all right, well, this is what I do every day. It's not a story. I just do this every day. But someone else can look at that and say, no, that's actually one of the interesting things about what it is that you do. And I think it's hugely helpful. And just to be able to help you figure out where to talk about then your story, how to communicate your authenticity. It's fabulous.
Yeah. And also, I think aligning your story with the right media outlet that serves the audience. Again, going back to the concept of serving an audience, for you, finding out media outlets that of course have people interested in tiny kitchens, like and you've been on a lot of different media outlets. I know you're working with a fabulous publicist, Kristen, and she's been helping you get on TV and in the newspaper and magazines. And
that's right.
What is it about PR as opposed to just buying ads too that makes it worthwhile for you to pursue?
Oh, I mean, to me, that goes to the intention and the authenticity, where you can create a connection with when you tell your story or someone else tells your story. So you can create a heart connection with someone that is much, I think, deeper and more true than simply an ad. I mean, I think sometimes ads can tell stories too. To me, the good ones tell stories, right? Yeah. But the opportunity to be able to have someone else read about your work and say, "Oh, I get that," or "Oh, that solves a problem for me," or "Oh, that's really special." That's sort of irreplaceable in terms of getting your word out there.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you said that solves a problem for me, because that is one of the things that when we're helping create a brand, it's like, how does your brand help people solve their greatest problem? Mm-hmm. Like, how can you be the knight in shining armor that comes along and helps swoop somebody off their feet? Right. And I can see how people would learn about your tiny kitchen cookbook and think, oh yeah, my daughter lives in a little apartment in Manhattan and she doesn't have any space. So I'd like to give my daughter that book because this will help solve that problem for her. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And then the other thing connected to the cookbook in terms of solving problems is all of those recipes are for 2 people. So as I wrote it, I was assuming most people in tiny spaces it's not going to be a family of 6, right? Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Right. For their sake. Yeah. But then all those things we've already touched on where for example, if you are only cooking for 2 people and you get a can of beans at the store and you say, all right, I'm going to use the recipe calls for half of that can of beans. Then you've got the other half of the can. So either it's waste or then I have to address that. So I started the cookbook writing the recipes for 2 people to solve one problem, discovered that I needed to address yet another problem, which is what do you do with when you open a jar of something? What do you do with the other stuff that you didn't use in that first recipe?
Right. That's a very good point. And I think a lot of people do put it in the back of their fridge and forget about it, and then they end up throwing it out. So
Yep. That's why I have that practice of you got to use up the leftovers before you go to the grocery store.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really important message that I think a lot of young people could stand to learn.
Yeah. So our girls would open when they were home. They'd open up the refrigerator and they'd be like, "There's nothing. There's stuff. There's food. There's all kinds of food. There's nothing to eat in here. There's no food."
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Pity you.
Oh.
Such a first world problem.
Exactly.
So Annie, you have done a lot of TV, podcasts, and print. Do you also do social media? And how do you create a strategy to implement all of it? And do you help carrying it out, or is Kristen doing all that for you?
So yes, I do have a social media strategy. We have a calendar, and I balance that between some personal things and then some videos and like how-to videos on YouTube, and then some tips related to tiny kitchen cooking, and then recipes, and then interspersed with sewing and garden and things like that. So we sort of look at what is the content that we have, and typically we start with we come at it from both angles. One, what story's happening now? Like what's current, what's interesting, what am I doing? And then also what's the content that we already have? Like what's visual? What do we have photos of? What do we have video of? Or what do I have a recipe already made that we can use? So we start there rather than starting from scratch with the creation of something. And then I do have help. Kristen doesn't typically, although she absolutely could, is not typically helping me with social media at this point, but she has in the past, and she absolutely could if I tapped her on the shoulder. She's fabulous. She's my favorite.
Yeah, she's a longtime friend too.
Yeah.
So, that's great. Is there a book, an app, or a website that has helped you either professionally or personally, and why?
Oh, wow. Personally or professionally?
Yeah, like do you have a favorite book that you read or recommend, or is there some app that you use every day?
Yeah, there's a couple. So I use Headspace, which is an app, and that's a meditation app. And there are a couple of books that are kind of like personal and professional that I recently have loved and still love. One is the 20-20-20 formula, and the other is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, and then the third is it's about like the 7-minute morning. I think it's called the 10-minute morning. He broke it into 7. I think it's called the 10-minute morning. And those are both on Audible. All of those are on Audible or hardcover, paperback. So what I discovered was that if I meditate in the morning and I have a healthy practice in the morning, then the rest of my day is fabulous. And even if I come up against challenge after challenge after challenge, I feel like I have far more resilience to meet whatever those challenges are. And then I also know that tomorrow morning, I'm going to look at yesterday, and I'm going to know that I'm carrying probably some of those challenges forward, but I'm going to address it. I'm going to think about how can I break it down into smaller parts? What do I need to do to like be a solution finder rather than even a problem solver, which is like, it's still on the positive side. But if I think about myself as a solution finder or a solution creator, then any of the challenges that come to me they feel like, all right, let's sort it out. We got this. Let's figure it out. We can. And so I just kind of roll with it rather than have it be something that stops me a little bit. And to me, that starts with the meditation piece.
Yeah. Well, another one that I enjoy is Hal Elrod's, I think it's $1 Million Mornings.
That's it. $1 Million Mornings. So he breaks it into both 7 and 10 minute increments. He did different articles and different, like when you listen to him on YouTube, he sometimes will flop back and forth between 7 and 10 minutes. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I got into that during the pandemic, and I was being really good about waking up at like 5:30 in the morning and doing exercise and visualization and reading. And he has what they call the savers, which it's an acronym for something, but it was really, really helpful. And I have to say, like, since things have been picking up again, I've gotten away from it a little bit. You know, in a weird way, I feel like that time during the pandemic being kind of in a cocoon.
Yep.
I didn't mind it so much. I feel a little guilty. I know there's a lot of people sick, and I'm very sad about that. But for me personally, like, it was a time for me to like kind of like set my inner compass.
Yeah, reset. Yeah, definitely.
But I'm fascinated that you're into sewing too, because I used to sew when I was a teenager. I was in a 4-H club and we sewed. And I still have my sewing machine and I have my mother's sewing machine, but I have not done anything with that for years. And I kind of would like to get back to that too. So do you sew clothes, or what do you sew?
Well, actually, when we sold the Riggin, I bought 10 months later, we sold the Riggin, and then 10 months later, I bought the business that I was working in and for Georges River Canvas. So it's a marine canvas shop.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So now so then it's still the same kind of thing, still intention and creativity and challenges with kind of the same thing, only it's fabric instead of food. And I'm still absolutely cooking all the time. And my day job has changed.
I love that. I didn't know you had a sewing business.
Yep.
You're such a fascinating person. Well, Annie, how can people get in touch with you?
So the website for the cookbook is homewithannie.com. And anybody can reach I'm on social media, so you can find me from Home with Annie. And then if anybody's interested in the canvas work, that's georgesrivercanvas.com. And happy to talk about that as well. If anybody wants the cookbook, those tiny kitchen cookbooks in particular, I'm selling them on my website, and they're all over. They're distributed nationally. So I can send someone a cookbook signed, or if someone walks into their local bookstore, they could either find it and or ask for it.
All right. Is it on Amazon.com?
It is. Yeah. And so are my other cookbooks as well. All of my books are on Amazon, and all of the books are sold on my website. The other books connected, my previous books, I self-published. So those are not as widely distributed.
But of course, we do want to encourage people to patronize their local bookstore.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We want those local bookstores to be there.
That's right. We want them to be there forever because we love those. Yeah.
Right.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I just have so enjoyed catching up with you. And
Me too.
I think we could talk forever and ever and not stop. So thank you for joining me on the PR Maven podcast.
So welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you to everybody in PR Maven Nation. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.